Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode. This is your host, David Kim. Hey, Megan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, David.
I look at your profile, did a little bit of homework, and then how you lived after graduate university. I can feel your special love toward Africa. Where did that come from?
So I think that, the continent, I think you have very different experiences depending on, where you first live and work on the continent. But I moved to the Republic of Guinea as a very idealistic 22-year-old as a member of the Peace Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you are an entrepreneurial person, you see challenges as like huge opportunities. And so I think immediately I was very kind of intellectually drawn to these are big problems. Like it's a market where you can create from scratch. You don't have to deal with legacy systems. Like you're competing with like analog solutions. So if you can create something that's simple and elegant and leverages technology, like it can get adopted, you can make big changes for people. So I think from an intellectual level, I got very interested in the markets, especially in West Africa. I've done work elsewhere, but mostly concentrated in West Africa. And then I think as a Peace Corps volunteer, one of the things the Peace Corps does really well is gets you to integrate into your local community. So I lived in a small town with a host family who's really become like my family, like an extended family for me. And your neighbors become real neighbors. I mean, you live with people for over 2 years. You're just kind of there, like celebrating with them and suffering with them. And so I think then from like an emotional standpoint, the fact that my host brothers, the young people in my community, the fact that youth unemployment rates are so high means that they're more likely than not to be unemployed. They're more likely than not to be underemployed. As someone who gets a lot of fulfillment out of the work that I do, they're not very likely to have similar types of work opportunities. And so I also just wanted to help reduce the issues of youth unemployment so that young people, growing up in Guinea or Ghana or Benin, they have the same access to opportunity that someone growing up in the US or Canada or the UK might have.
So it sounds like you have observed a lot of problem issues on the ground in Africa, and then you are so motivated to solve the problem by yourself. Is it correct to say that?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good.
Why don't you tell us, what you do and who you are now? Please help me to connect to the dot.
Sure. So my name is Meghan McCormick. I am the co-founder and CEO of OZÉ, which is a tech company that equips small business owners to collect their financial data and use it to make better decisions and access capital. We are focused on African markets. We're headquartered in Accra, Ghana, and are serving several of the countries in the West Africa region. My career path has been a mixture of social enterprise, innovation strategy, and developing expertise around West African market, especially around issues of youth unemployment and micro and small business development. So while my career path might seem a little zigzaggy back and forth, everything's kind of moving towards that same goal. So straight out of university, I joined the Peace Corps, where I was a community economic development volunteer in the Republic of Guinea. In my time there, I actually ended up co-founding an organization called Dare to Innovate, which is actually where the name OZÉ comes from. It comes from the French word for dare, OZÉ. And it was Guinea's first business accelerator. It was also the first small business accelerator, the first social business accelerator. And we focused on getting unemployed youth to the point where they could start a company that solved a problem in their community and also employed up to 10 of their peers. And so I think that time in the Peace Corps and co-founding Dare to Innovate, which is now one of the largest small business accelerators in Francophone Africa, led me down this path of really wanting to solve the problem of youth unemployment and youth being defined by the UN as 18 to 35-year-olds. So really those big productive years where you get set off on the path that can define the rest of your life in terms of career, family life, earning potential, all of that. After serving in the Peace Corps, I came back and I was an innovation strategist for over 3 years. I served clients globally, mostly kind of Fortune 50 industrials companies, and became expert at using a process of human-centered design to co-create solutions with customers that could have new business models, new way of partnering, and really create big change within organizations who wanted to solve the old problems in new ways because the old ways weren't working anymore. After some time there, I really said, okay, this is really fascinating work. I actually loved my job. I didn't leave because I wasn't satisfied in any way. But I wanted to then apply that same approach that I had seen work to solving the problem I really cared about, which was youth unemployment in West Africa. I had not a great idea of exactly how I was going to go ahead and do that at scale. Because 11 million African youth join the job market each year, and 2/3 are unemployed and underemployed. So no kind of small intervention is even going to make a dent in that problem. So I went back to graduate school. I believe that tricky problems are solved through kind of intersectional solutions. So I wanted to get expertise in business. So I went and got my MBA at MIT at the Sloan School of Management, and then my MPA from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So I could really look at the interplay between the public and private sector for creating solutions that really advance society's goals, while also returning profits to shareholders. And graduated. After graduation, moved to Ghana, and I've been working on OZÉ full-time ever since.
I have an interesting question. When you told your family and friends about your plan to come to Africa as a volunteer and or the run a startup, what did they say about? So did they say, oh, that's a great idea? Or did they say you're crazy about running a venture instead of finding a well-paying job in Wall Street? I saw that you basically graduated from the most expensive university in US, right? Typical expectation of people, they want to go to the good school and they graduate from the good school and then they find a job as a global consulting company or investment banking in Wall Street. That's a typical expectation. So I think you are not going through the typical path. So what did they say about it?
I think I have to start by saying, the ability to take such big risks in your career is much easier to do when you come from a place of privilege and have a family safety net and a social safety net, right? So I am lucky that my parents were able to pay for my undergraduate degree, and I didn't have to turn around and start paying off loans. And I think that's what makes a lot of this possible. So I think you have to acknowledge kind of the advantages that you have that allow you to do these kinds of things. When I said I was going to join the Peace Corps, I had old friends who, honestly, I don't remember these conversations, but they said, you've been talking about joining the Peace Corps since we were like 10 years old. I honestly have no clue, but for my friends, it didn't really surprise them. I'd actually never been to Africa, but I wanted to do the Peace Corps in Africa because part of me is still very traditional. I was like, oh, I speak French. I would love to come away being fluent. Like, let me apply for Africa where I can use my French. And so that first time, like, I'm sure my parents were nervous. When I joined the Peace Corps, 22 years old, was moving to a country none of us had ever heard of. But I think a lot changed. My mom and my younger brother came to visit me in Guinea, stayed in my hut with my community, and realized that there's probably like nowhere safer for me in the world than being in a community where I was very visible and well cared for and well loved, and nobody would let anything happen to me there. When I think then at that point, like, I kind of knew that my career was going to be focused on the West Africa region at the very least, if not continentally. And so within the consulting firm, like, I kind of had a reputation. I joined Monitor Deloitte right when the Ebola epidemic was breaking out. So I was like always trying to raise awareness and talk about it. So I think everybody knew that I had just come back from Guinea, and that I was still running this accelerator in Guinea. I would say when I left after grad school to move back and run OZÉ, there was again a little bit of tension because I was sponsored by Monitor Deloitte, so I could go back into consulting for 2 years and have all my student loans from graduate school, which I paid. My parents didn't pay this time, paid off for me whilst making, like a massive salary, and instead took a pay cut down to like half of what I made when I first started consulting. But I think I had signaled to everybody, right? Because in game theory, you talk about burning the ships, right? I had burnt the ships. I turned down my cushy consulting job. I had signaled to everyone I'm running this company, and I had made it my mission for the 3 years I was in grad school to have de-risked the idea enough that I could raise capital and pay myself a salary. So I was able to graduate and pay myself. I didn't graduate, move to Ghana with no money, like try to make ends meet for a little while and then raise funding. So I think that was helpful. And then my schooling was very expensive, but luckily the generosity of places like the Legatum Center at MIT and the Center for Social Innovation and Change at the Harvard Kennedy School were able to cover a lot of the expenses that I had while studying. So I did leave with debt, but not nearly as much debt as a lot of my colleagues.
No, you didn't have a naysayer.
I think I've always been known as strong-willed, so who knows what people were saying behind my back. But at this point,
so
they knew I was doing it.
Yeah, they might say behind you. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, they might have been like, what is Meghan doing? Like, why is she turning down all this money?
Okay.
And a job truly that I loved. Like, I really enjoyed my time in consulting. But, I think in the time that I was in grad school and the solution that became OZÉ started to emerge, it was no longer just like, I feel really compelled to solve this problem, but that I thought that I had found a solution that could be a big business and that this opportunity wasn't going to sit around forever. And so that kind of gave a sense of urgency and pressure. And I think convinced some of my more business-minded friends and family, like, oh, she's not going over there to be a saint. She's going over there to build, the next $1 billion fintech company.
Yeah, I'm on your side personally. I spent the last 3 decades working at the international bank and the global company. But I regret, actually. Life is very short to work, live in the, process-driven large organization. In hindsight, I feel it's not that motivating. Even though the challenge might be very hard and difficult, it is worthwhile, I guess.
Maybe it's not unique to consulting, but consulting is what I know is I get very emotionally and intellectually engaged in the work that I do. So the fact that we were trying to solve difficult problems for corporations, like I threw my mind, body, and soul into my projects, especially the type of human-centered design we do. Like I would ride on tractors in farms. I went to quarries in France. I went down into slums in Kenya and interviewed people about financial services. That you like want these things to come in the world, but like you're really just at the kind of the birthplace of the concept, and then you have to hand over your newborn infant back into the corporation and hope that it happens. So I think there's a lot of fulfillment that comes leaving consulting and going into entrepreneurship, because I still get to do all of the kind of concept development work that I really like to do, but then it's in my hands to make sure that it becomes real in the world.
Yeah, I guess, I believe, your experience in a consulting company, it is very helpful to running a startup in terms of discipline and then concentration, right?
Yeah, and I think you get a different level of kind of what good looks like. So my work standards are really high. And I think part of that comes from when you're being paid like a lot of money for your time, you know that you always have to deliver your best work. You can't be shoddy about it. And so I think it's a really good kind of boot camp, especially for young people, to put themselves to a level of work that they know now that they don't only have to do, but can absolutely accomplish.
I'm looking at the company profile, the business described in the Crunchbase and LinkedIn, your website. A little bit confusing to me. One in Crunchbase says OZÉ is a habit-forming mobile app that make it easy for SMEs in Africa keep digital record and make the better decision and access capital. Sounds like an education app. But when I look at the different place, LinkedIn and your company website, and it sounds more like a app. The SME owner or operator, they can use it to manage and information, and then to make data-driven decision. So my question is, what are the problem are you solving now? What are the key features of the app, and how do you make money?
Sure. So you actually kind of hit on two sides of the app. And I think this is one of the ways that you can really tell that we came out of a design-led approach, and we weren't just copying and pasting. So we're not trying to make QuickBooks or Africa, right? We are solving a problem, and the problem that we're solving is that most small businesses in Africa don't grow. I mean, this is across all emerging markets, but we see it very starkly in sub-Saharan Africa. the vast majority, it can be between like 85 and 95%, depending on the country, of micro and small enterprises are sole proprietors. So this ties back to wanting to solve the problems of youth unemployment. If most businesses are small businesses and most small businesses don't hire anyone, of course, you're going to have massive amounts of unemployed people, and it forces a lot of people into necessity entrepreneurship. And then they don't have the knowledge, tools, and experience that they need to actually, survive and prosper as a business owner. And so it contributes back into this vicious cycle. So what OZÉ is replacing the handwritten paper ledger book that most business owners across emerging markets use to keep records if they're keeping records. So if you go to a small shop here, or even, the new generation of social commerce sellers on Instagram, they have a notebook where they're recording down, bought this for this amount of money, sold this for this amount of money. So we wanted to digitize that, because so much, once that data is digitized, you can do so much more with it. When it's in a notebook, I say it lives and dies in the notebook. And the only advantage is that you can pat yourself on the back and say, look at me, I'm keeping records. But it's not purely a technology problem, right? Plenty of people have access, Wave just left Africa, but you could get basically the knockoff version of QuickBooks for free in Africa, and people weren't using it. So we don't approach it from a pure technology perspective. We approach it from a behavior change perspective. And that's why we focus on making the app habit forming, especially in the early parts of the customer journey. So we're leveraging principles of game design so that they actually start to record, like our entrepreneurs start to record all of their sales, all of their expenses, their payables, receivables, customer information. And we actually have customers who say using the OZÉ app is fun. And I think that's probably, we're like the only accounting app out there that people are like, oh, it's very fun, I like using it. So that's part of it. And then we show back their data, their business performance to them in a really easy to understand dashboard. But I also know that having the data is a huge leap forward. Like just showing people their cash balance, showing them if they're profitable or not, has a huge impact on the way that businesses actually make decisions and operate. But knowing how to interpret that data is equally important. So OZÉ provides daily business tips through the persona of an OZÉ coach in the app. So that's where a bit of education comes in. We're helping you form habits around record keeping, and then we're giving you the knowledge that you need to actually get the fullest use out of those records that you're keeping. And we did that, as I just explained it, through the end of 2019. And we found that 97% of businesses that were consistent in the app were growing, profitable, or both. So we do have some early proof, at least correlation, if not causation, that OZÉ helps business performance. And so in 2020, we turned around and said, okay, what else? What's the next step that we can do with this data? And one of the biggest blockages to small business growth and success is access to affordable, no collateral capital. And so we created, we have a really fantastic data scientist on our team. We've built a machine learning algorithm that crunches OZÉ data as well as data from mobile money. It's just basically like digital currency, mobile money. I don't know how to explain it to someone who doesn't know mobile money, and bank history into this algorithm, and then gives an indication of affordability and credit risk. And so we've started making loans to our customer base as well, either directly through us or in partnership with other financial institutions. And have found when you have the whole process, so you use OZÉ, you use the OZÉ data to make an assessment, you use the app to disperse a loan and to nudge people to repay, that works really flawlessly. So we have a 0% default rate, nearing 1 year of experience on our pilot. And a really high ROI, like about 73% ROI on a small loan fund that we've been piloting with.
Out of how many borrowers so far?
Less than 100, really small. It's a pilot. We need to get basically licenses from the Bank of Ghana in order to do it at scale. So keep tuned for 2021. We should be scaling up that program shortly.
What kind of financing or loan? Is a working capital loan or the quick cash, or what form of the financing or lending to that?
So it's basically we use cash flow to determine cash flow, and then to determine affordability, and then other data to determine riskiness. I guess it's closest to a working capital loan, but it's interesting. I think part of what I discovered very early on in making these loans available is that part of the issue with small business owners getting loans is that actually the right loan product doesn't exist in the mass market. because the amount of money that they need to borrow looks kind of like a working capital loan. So our
Right.
loans are around $500 to $5,000. But you would expect a working capital loan to act like a line of credit and be paid back, in 30 days and maximum 90 days, right?
Mhm.
But our customers need 6 months to 12 months in order to take an amount of money into their business that will actually help their business and then pay it back. So we're kind of a new form of loan, which is like
just a short-term lending, right?
Yeah,
Short-term.
exactly.
Short-term lending. Interesting. Your business sounds like, it started from the very interesting angle, try to educate form a habit of your customer as a micro business. That is a very sound, interesting angle. Many other business startup can learn from them to build the scale, build the platform with a lot of.
Yeah, I think what I've seen is interesting is where we've seen massive numbers of users and big funding rounds and a lot of kind of virality in fintech in Africa is too. It's digital loans and payments, right? So those things are slight behavior change, but digital loan apps, if we didn't need to be licensed and we just flooded the market and said, okay, come take loans from us, like we could grow very, very, very quickly. Having an app that relies on the level of behavior change that we need for the business owner to actually keep records and not just treat it like their New Year's resolution, but keep going after the first 10 days, first 30 days, first 3 months, to the point where we have enough rich data to give them access to these other benefits, like that's definitely a slower growth model. And so I think that's given us a bit of a competitive moat because a lot of people don't have the time, resources, or patience to go the route that we have gone. But also digital lending, I think, is on the path to becoming as much of an infrastructure piece as digital payments have become. And so the fact that OZÉ has its unique data source and that we're tracking the cash transactions, and most businesses run on hard cash here, that actually is going to allow us to sustain our advantage in lending and lend larger amounts at longer windows with lower risk than just, quickly going into some fast, like 30-day based on your bank history loan product that we see taking off in places like Kenya and Nigeria.
I actually personally, myself, in 1990s, I helped to set up the many non-bank finance company bank working together with Government Policy Bank and ADB, IFC. But I don't believe that the banking or even non-banking finance, multi-finance company underwriting process helpful to support the SME in the emerging market and frontier market. It is not performing at all. So I hope that, myself or somebody in Africa and can come up with the interesting business model to support SME or micro business financially in terms of lending or investment or something hybrid. That might be a very interesting business solution people may work on to find out.
Yeah, I think consumer credit has really taken off. Mm-hmm. But SME financing hasn't taken off at scale. I agree. Please come work with us.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. I may find out some opportunity move to Africa. Consumer loan and then SME loan is 100% different underwriting process. Consumer loan is based on statistics or nothing to do with SME's loan.
Yeah, the consumer loans that have taken off in sub-Saharan Africa are mostly based on your phone records.
Right.
So some companies are doing really interesting things around like who you call, how you save your data, that kind of stuff, your social media. Some are just looking at, how much credit you add into your phone because it's prepaid phones, how much credit you're adding, how consistently. But with leveraging on that data, you're never going to be able to come out with any formula that gives you a loan that's big enough for a business for it to actually be worth the cost of capital for that business to take that loan on. So I think it's a tricky space. I think whoever figures it out, and I think we're on the path to figuring out, it's very lucrative because the interest rates we're lowering them significantly for our customer base, but they're still, especially to an American palate, feel very, very high. And then you're lending out larger amounts of money. So you, instead of needing to do millions of loans to reach a point where the business is actually profitable and generating significant turnover, it can be in the thousands, tens of thousands. So I think it's a really interesting space if someone can figure it out. And I think that could be us. Yeah.
Yeah. can may come up with a very different, very new idea from the conventional financing underwriting process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I found that you recently raised a seed funding from the multiple investor. It seems like you're good at the fundraising. How did you crack the code, and what is your secret weapon in helping investor build the trust, gain the confidence in your business, in yourself?
It's an interesting question because I feel like no early stage founder feels like they're good at fundraising, and to this day have gotten exponentially more no's than yeses. I think it's about finding the
Yeah,
right investors.
that's right.
Our first investors were mostly North American. And I think part of what spurred the earliest investors to commit was this idea of like having missed out on the boom in China, like seeing that emerging markets can take off in what feels like overnight. And if you're there in the early stages, like there's a lot, you gain a lot, right? For these, we don't actually have any impact investors. Like we have like tech pure financial returns investors. So they didn't want to miss out on Africa. They saw themselves having missed out on other emerging markets taking off. And then I think, some of our earliest investors were in Texas, like in the middle of the country. You're sitting there in Texas, you want to invest in Africa, but how, like, maybe don't know a single African person. And so I think being able to be someone who has lived in a rural community in Africa, has lived in a hut, done water in a river, got all my water out of the well, cooked over, coals outside. But then also worked in corporate America, like being able to straddle those two worlds and then having the pedigree of the names of like MIT and Harvard, like that's kind of what got them over the hump in the earliest days.
Yes.
I think now the people who invest, like part of them are really interested in our approach. The fact that we're co-creating with our customers, that we've built something that works, that we've built something that really garners a lot of loyalty from our customer base. I think that's exciting to them. And just the potential of what this business could grow into being gets them really excited. I mean, we're still at an early stage, so they're not looking at a balance sheet and saying like, okay, fuel to the fire, let's go and make a lot of money overnight. We're still quite early on the journey, but they're seeing the early indicators that mean that OZÉ could become a big and profitable business and a big and profitable investment for them.
Do you have African investor among the shareholders?
We do. Yeah. We do. Yeah. I very early on, because I'm not, my co-founder and I, neither of us are African. We're both Americans. We really were like, okay, we want all African capital, because if this business grows to what we think it can be, we're going to return so much capital to shareholders. And like, we want to return that capital to Accra, not to New York or San Francisco. But I think we very quickly learned that investing, especially early stage investing, is pattern recognition. And the ecosystem here is quite young. So we don't have, it's starting now, but we don't really have like a large community of angel investors willing to put their wealth into tech. Because here you can buy a building, treasury bonds are like 17% for a 90-day Ghana T-bill. So people are used to much more traditional and steady ways of turning their wealth into more wealth. And because the risk profile and the pattern recognition, because you don't have as many kind of early indicators as you might have in San Francisco or Boston or New York, where investors are seeing pitch deck after pitch deck, they want you to be a little later on. So I feel like in San Francisco, early is you have an idea in your head. In New York, early is you have a PowerPoint. In Boston, early is you have a prototype. In Ghana, early is you have paying customers. And so we had to wait till we got to paying customers before we really had local investors join our round. But in terms of institutional investors, we have Aggressive Capital from Nigeria, Nest from Ghana, and then we have angels and angel groups from South Africa and Nigeria as well as Ghana. So we now have a lot more African representation in our round.
You said you have an African investor. I'm not sure whether you have that when you went through that challenge and difficulty. But what do you think is the biggest challenge African startup face running a company and then raising money from the investor?
So I think we have unique challenges running companies here. A lot of it has to do with infrastructure, like the tech stack in the US, because it's used so much more, is more flawless. Like if I use Stripe to collect payments. I don't really worry about Stripe not working. Whereas here, like it's almost every tech in your tech stack is like coming from another startup. So there's a lot of complexity in who you partner with to build and like what you outsource versus build yourself, which can add time and complexity to your roadmap. And because there's very little early stage funding, and I would say almost no pre-revenue funding here, you also are negotiating like what are the early stage steps I want to do to build a strong foundation versus like what are the early stage steps that I want to do to get revenue into the door quickly. And so I think that's one of it's a really complex decision to make, and there's no easy way of doing it. And so once you add all of that complexity to the fact that the ecosystem is quite young, so you don't really have a lot of people who are on their third or fourth startup, or a lot of people leaving one fast growing startup to join another fast growing startup. So there's not as much like embedded knowledge. It just is challenging. But we'll get there. I think it's just early stage. And that having more angel investors, more people writing kind of pre-revenue checks so that you can optimize for solid foundations rather than quick revenue will help us all advance us as a community.
Tell me about how company has grown since establishment. How is it performing now in terms of annual sales, number of subscription, client, or whatever number you can share with us?
Sure. So I mean, we are a freemium platform. So we started almost a whole year before we made any money of people just using our platform for free. So we've seen a lot of growth in the number of paid subscribers. COVID was an interesting year to be serving micro and small, medium enterprises. Ghana had a quite strict stay-at-home order. And so we saw 60%, more than 60% of our high active users, their revenue go to zero by the end of March of last year. So the story of growth that you really want to tell, like the steep up and towards the right, I think you'll look back with this 2020 and you'll see that very few people followed that exact model. Most people had a blip in it. So we actually haven't focused on growth for the past 12 months. We focused on building a really strong product and focused on helping the businesses using OZÉ survive a really challenging economic time. That being said, our revenue's been growing pretty quickly month on month for the last 6 months, I think, since things have calmed down a little bit. I would say some interesting kind of models that we have is like we definitely sell direct to small business owners. They are our primary customer. They are our reason for being. But we also partner with like large corporates. We sell to banks, so we enable them to lend to SMEs, and we have some interesting, I can't say who, but signed partnerships that will be coming live in this year that allow us to really scale up our lending practice. And then we partner with organizations like the United Nations to have them help us get our technology out into the hands of business owners, that if we had to cover all of the costs of reaching and acquiring those customers, it wouldn't make business sense for them. But with some subsidy coming from UNCDF, which is the part of the UN that works on financial inclusion, then the business case works out and we can go reach thousands of rural business owners. So I think we're still really early on, but we're seeing exciting growth, and I'm just ready for 2021 where we can put a little more fuel to the fire.
Yeah. And then what is your African dream, your end game in Africa?
We want opening your OZÉ account to be as natural and fundamental part of starting a new business as picking a name. So every business out there, we want them to have an OZÉ account, and we want them to say, my business really started thriving when I got on OZÉ, like to be able to look back and say, this was the inflection point in my own success story as an entrepreneur in Ghana, or Nigeria, in Kenya, in Guinea, across the continent. So that's really what we're trying to be, the business advisor in the pocket of every African entrepreneur.
Thank you so much for taking time to be on the show and then sharing the very, very interesting story. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having another chance to hear the updated version of the OZÉ sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, share with a friend, and drop me a review. Goodbye.